Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 10 essential, and I mean you can't live without, essential concertante symphonies for all of you beginners out there, and those of you who aren't beginners and don't know about concertante symphonies. So what is a concertante symphony, or more appropriately, as it was called in the day, a symphonie concertante? You may have noticed that sounds French, and it was. Symphonie concertante. The idea is to combine the virtues of a concerto, which has distinctive solo parts, with that of the symphony, which often has four movements, including a minuet or a dance movement, and, the traditional shape of the symphony. The soloists were not supposed to be huge virtuosos in these concertante works. The reason is because, well, you couldn't always get a huge virtuoso. You know what I mean? And sometimes you wanted to give the first chair players in your orchestra, say the first oboe or the first cello, something to do to make them stand out so they could get some applause and maybe earn a few extra bucks. And so the Symphonie Concertante addressed that need. And there's some lovely works in that form, and it persisted right up into the 20th century. I mean, not all the works are called that, but that's what they are. And so we're going to see, sort of how it took shape over the centuries, not starting at the beginning. I mean, in the beginning, you had composers like in France, the Chevalier de Saint-Georges, who was famous because he was a mulatto. He was half African American, and a fencing master, and all the ladies were after him. And he wrote symphonies concertantes. And the most famous symphony concertante composer, one of them, was the youngest of Bach's sons, J.C. Bach, the English Bach, who was in London for much of his career, but also on the continent. And he composed a bazillion symphonies concertantes. It was a big deal. Haydn and Mozart, our biggies from the classical period, wrote very, very few. And Beethoven technically wrote none at all, but his triple concerto is essentially a symphony concertante. He didn't call it that, and it only has three movements. So as with everything in our musical tradition, there are no fixed, hard and fast rules. There really aren't. I mean, you sort of make it up as you go along. The important thing is that there is a consistent series of soloists who play throughout the work. And that's about all you can say about them. So let's look at the top 10, because there's some really, really wonderful pieces in here that you should know, because they're glorious. First, Mozart. Now, this is the most famous of all the symphony concertante pieces, concertante, whatever you want to call it. That's still called that. It's his Symphony Concertante for Violin and Viola in E-flat major, Kerschel number 364. Now, there are other Mozart Symphony Concertantes. There's a wind one. They are, well, some of them aren't authentic, and they're not nearly as good as this one. This is mature Mozart. This is one of the great double concertos. It's in three movements. It's a big piece, half an hour long, full of gorgeous tunes and really heartfelt, expressive melody. I mean, it's just, it's marvelous. And that's where your career as a symphony concertantist ought to begin, with this particular work. And if you want to explore the earlier ones, as I mentioned, by those composers, Chevalier de Saint-Georges and J.C. Bach and people like that, Ignaz Pleyel, knock yourself out. They're beautiful. They're lovely pieces. There's a lot of history before we get to Mozart, but really we want to begin there, because I want to give you the best. I mean, this is an essential list, not a one of those, sort of like everything you can throw into the pile lists. So remember that, folks who are watching this. We're only talking about the music in the list, which is right below, so you can see it. Haydn. He wrote, as one of his last symphony-type things, a Symphonia Concertante for violin, cello, oboe, and bassoon. This is sometimes known as Symphony No. 105. And he wrote it because his pupil, Pleyel, was also doing a competing concert series in London at the same time that Haydn was premiering his last 12 London symphonies. And Pleyel was a Symphony Concertante specialist. And so Haydn said, I can do that. And he did, and it's marvelous. A beautiful, beautiful work in Haydn's ripest, mature style. So that's a lot of fun. And then we sort of skip over like decades, like really decades, like 40 years, half a century almost, until we get to the next major one, the next really major one, which is Berlioz, Harold in Italy. Now, this is a symphony. He says it's a symphony. It's a symphony for viola and orchestra. It was written for Paganini, who refused to play it because it wasn't virtuosic enough for Paganini, although he paid for it. He was a good guy about it, and when he heard it, he thought it was marvelous. It just wasn't for him. It's one of the great works for viola and orchestra because Paganini was, working on violas at that point. He handled all kinds of stringed instruments. He also was a fabulous guitarist. I mean, not just the violin. And so he wanted to have something for the viola that could show off what he could do on the viola. Well, Harold in Italy doesn't really do that. It's a symphony with a hero. And the hero is Harold, who dies at the end, which is a problem. And he dies during an orgy. He doesn't even get to participate in the orgy. You can see that Paganini was certainly not going to give up the opportunity to participate in the orgy. But it's a magnificent work, and it's colorful and full of pictures and tunes, and it's great. And it's a symphony concertante. After that, we get, these are not in strict chronological order, by the way, but they're, sort of, well, some are, and some aren't. Joseph Jongen. Now, Jongen was a Belgian composer, and he wrote a lot of really very attractive orchestral music, a late romantic guy. And one of his pieces is a symphony concertante for organ and orchestra. And if you look at the list below, you'll notice that where we don't know in the title what the solo instruments are, I tell you what they are, so you can see whether you're really interested in pursuing it. Organ and orchestra is a fairly popular combination of things. Actually, there's a lot of music written for that, but not a lot of it's terribly popular. The most famous is the Saint-Saëns Organ Symphony and the Poulenc Organ Concerto for organ, strings, and timpani. Those are kind of like the biggies, and there are a lot of orchestral works that have organ parts in them. But as a soloist, that kind of thing, Jongen's Symphony Concertante is a magnificent piece of music and a lot of fun and full of good tunes. And if you can stand the sound of the organ for half an hour or so, you're going to really enjoy it. It's a beautiful piece. It's been recorded quite a few times in the past, say 2 decades or so. It's a great piece to play when concert halls inaugurate new organs because it really shows off what the organ can do and gives the orchestra some really hot licks as well. Beautiful, beautiful piece. Worth investigating, in my view. Next, Vincent d'Indy, the pupil of César Franck, who wrote the Symphony on a French Mountain Air, which is basically a piano concerto. It's for piano and orchestra. It's lovely. It's really D'Indy's nicest piece. It was for years and years the only thing by him that got played regularly. Now even that's sort of out of fashion. But I played it. I did it. I played cymbals, but I played it in concert, and it was great fun. And it's a beautiful, beautiful piece, and it has humor. The ending is very funny, actually. It really is. The piano and the orchestra can't decide how the piece should end, and they sort of have an argument over it, and it's deliciously humorous. And the tune that it's based on is wonderful. It goes ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya bam ba ba da bam, and it pops up in every movement. And it's just delicious. Very difficult to play. That's why you don't hear it that much, because pianists think it's easy and they don't want to be, caught doing something that doesn't say concerto, but then they look at it and they find it's too hard for them. Something to keep in mind. Next, Danish composer Niels Gade. Yeah, his Symphony No. 5. Now, the Symphony No. 5 has a solo piano. It's a concertante symphony. And Gade is a good composer. He wrote 8 symphonies. He was of the Leipzig school of Mendelssohn. So he kind of sounds like, Mendelssohn Goes to Copenhagen, sort of. And it's charming and light and effervescent. And the piano part is full of nice licks for the soloist. And it's really a lovely work, an absolutely lovely work that's virtually unknown. And there's no reason for that. There are a few recordings of it out there. It's not hard to find. And you'll enjoy it very much. It's a charming, charming piece. After that, Bohuslav Martinu. Now, Martinu wrote a symphony concertante for violin, cello, oboe, and bassoon. Sound familiar? Yes, it's the same ensemble as in the Haydn, because he heard a performance of the Haydn. In fact, we know which one he heard. It was Charles Munch, because it was recorded. It was played on French radio. And he was like, oh, that's really good. I'd like to do one of those. And so he did. It's in his own style, of course, but it makes a wonderful companion piece to the Haydn, because it's written for exactly the same forces, and you can enjoy making the comparison between a genuine classical piece and a 20th century neoclassical knockoff that is charming, really, and delightful as the original in many respects. It's a terrific work. After that, Leonard Bernstein, Symphony No. 2, The Age of Anxiety. Well, this is based on a rather wacky poem by W.H. Auden, and it is a concertante symphony for piano and orchestra. The piano part is extremely brilliant and really fun to listen to, but Bernstein ran into the same problem that concertante people run into, the same problem Berlioz ran into, which is that at the end of it, the soloist gradually drops out and the orchestra finishes without him. And that's sort of, Bernstein was like, well, there's the piano there. I can't ask the guy to just sit there and do nothing, for the last 5 minutes or so. So he added a few chords at the end for the piano to come back in, just so we know it's there. It's an aesthetic issue. It's something you should keep in mind. That's probably one of the reasons why the Concertante Symphony died out, because you really can't have a solo work in which the soloist is not important consistently, and that's a real conundrum that composers try to resolve, and Bernstein did it that way. If you get his first recordings of the work, it doesn't have that revised ending. The soloist just goes away. Very, very interesting. Next, I love this piece. Frank Martin, the Swiss composer, he wrote a piece called Petite Symphonie Concertante, the Little Symphony Concertante, for piano, harp, harpsichord, and double string orchestra. Got that? It's really a wild piece. It's in 2 movements. It's about 20 some odd minutes long. It's got great tunes in it. Technically, it's in a 12-tone piece or an 8-tonal piece. It's not. It's got real melodies. It may be written in 12-tone fashion, but you can really hear the melodies. The finale, dum ba da, bum 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 ba da. You can sing it. It's easy. It's a march, and you've got a harp and a harpsichord, and a piano, and balance problems in this pieces are a nightmare because the 3 instruments are just so unequal in terms of what they can do. But it's just gorgeous and great fun to listen to. A wonderful piece to get to know. It really gets you hooked. It was so unusual in its scoring that Frank Martin rearranged it as a symphony, just a plain symphony, his first symphony or a symphony, not as a symphony concertante, because where are you going to find a harpsichord, a harp, and a piano to all be soloists together? Again, the sometime impracticality of the symphony concertante concept can be an issue. But some masterpieces have been written, and this was written in the 1940s, and it is a masterpiece. It's just a great, great work. And finally, last but not least, Karol Szymanowski, Symphony No. 4, also known as Symphony Concertante or Concertante. You can pronounce the E or not. It doesn't make any difference. This is for piano and orchestra. It's almost a piano concerto because it has lots for the piano to do, and it has a real slam, bang, exciting finale. Where the orchestra gradually sort of takes over from the piano, even though it's playing. It's going absolutely nuts at the very end, but it's gorgeous. A beautiful, beautiful work, full of good tunes and juicy orchestration and excitement and rhythmic power. You gotta love it. Absolutely love it. In 3 movements. It's not a 4-movement symphony. It's really concerto-like, but he called it Symphony Concertante. He wrote it for Arthur Rubinstein, who recorded it once in mono and then never touched it again, which is a shame, probably because it was not a concerto. That's what happens to these pieces, but they don't deserve their neglect, because whatever the soloists may think of them, the music is great, and it's the music that always matters. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Enjoy your symphonies concertante. Take care.